There we go. And we're live. And I think everything is. Is everything backwards tonight? Why is everything backwards? Hello, everybody. If you're joining us out there, I've just noticed that everything on my screen is backwards. I don't know why. And I'm wondering what can I do about that? I don't know. Let me see. Does it not matter? I don't know. It's a bit weird looking. Just having everything. I don't know what I've done to my camera. Anyway, thanks very much for joining us, folks. I suppose it's just a little bit strange to see the screen. Everything's flipped, and I'm not too sure what I've done. But there you go. So if you're joining us tonight, it's Friday night, Science Fiction Friday, here on Doc Sloan Science Fiction Station. It's another windy, gusty night here. Very stormy, very wet outside. And we've just finished up with our premiere of our new episode on the Pelophids in June. And just continuing on from where we left off last week, we had a wee look at Atreus and Thyestes and Agamemnon and Menelaus, taking us up to basically another natural breakpoint at the beginning of the Trojan War. So we're going to carry on with Agamemnon and Menelaus next week and take that family line through the Trojan War and to the aftermath with I suppose the death of Agamemnon, and then I suppose the revenge of Orestes, and the final end of the Pelopid line with Tisamenus, if I could say that correctly. So there we go. So it's all quite horrific stuff, I have to say, and they're pretty well known stories throughout the ages. And I think if you have a look at the artwork, this was quite tricky to put this episode together. Really trying to find sort of relevant, the relevant images and archaeological artifacts. So yeah, quite tricky in some places. So we've kind of used a few different types of images to kind of fill the gaps a wee bit. But you'll notice that there's medieval art. You know, there's Renaissance art. There's art on these stories throughout the ages, and in particular the feast of Atreus and Thyestes is something that seems to have taken the fancy of a few different artists over the years. So this is as a result of the curse of Myrtilus upon Pelops, and this is the line of Pelops and particularly his sons here, Atreus and Thyestes. This is where the curse really gets quite strange and bizarre, and we have infanticide, we have cannibalism, incest, murder, rape. It's quite a lot of mythological stories are like this. They're quite horrific. And what we get here is a sort of repetition of certain types of stories over and over again, and that'll create a cyclical pattern of violence within this family, where family member kills family member, and then another family member must take revenge, and it's just this perpetual cycle of violence, and I suppose hubris as well. Excuse me. So yeah, if anybody's out there tonight and you are having a wee listen, if you've got any questions, fire away for me. Let us know, or any comments on tonight's video. I'll be delighted to hear them. If you're listening away there, Babs, as you were saying, you'll be listening, not participating there. But oh, there you are. I was just going to say hello to you and your company. Okay, dog. I'm just trying to juggle you in this company. Wish me luck. I will do, Babs. There you are. I just thought I'd say hello to everybody and everyone who's around. So I hope you're all keeping well. Alma and Light was sort of nice. I caught a stream, not to mention starting with rape, and it's just yeah. Sorry, Alma. It's the Atreides and the Atreidii family, the Pelopids. It's all wonderful stuff, and it's pretty heavy. Check Karen saying there was a video already. I missed it. Yeah, Karen. I just thought because we sort of said that we would do these Science Fiction Fridays at 10 o'clock, I would try and put on the videos to sort of finish, so that we could start this at 10. Excuse me a wee second, folks. I'm just going to close the window because the wind is blasting everything here. It's gusting in mightily. Oh, there we go. Like to let a little bit of air in, but that's it's a bit much. It's another wet, stormy day here. Excuse me. But yeah, Karen, so we just did part 2. It's up on the channel now, of our little series on the Pelophids in June, as we take you through the Pelopid line. And yeah, there's plenty more to come, Alma, by the way, in the next episode. It's a, as I said, the Atreidae, which we start with in this episode. Well, we start with Atreus and Thyestes in this episode that we've just done, and then we get into the beginning of Agamemnon and Menelaus, and we brought a little bit of the side story in to do with the first kidnapping of Helen of Troy, which is by Theseus and Perithous, and that's quite an interesting little set of stories as well. What happens to them, and so it brings in various mythological beings like the Dioscuri, because of course Helen of Troy is one of a set of quads. Excuse me. And it really shows you, I suppose, the familial connection, setting up this arguably this dynasty of Mycenaean Greece. And we end up with, at the end of this video, we ended up with Agamemnon being the king of Mycenae and Menelaus being the king of Sparta, and they have their respective wives, Clytemnestra and Helen of Sparta, who will become, of course, Helen of Troy. There we go. So just, yeah, Babs says, hubris, yes, it seemed to me Atreus was big-headed to steal his brother's kingdom. Well, I suppose the interesting thing is that we're leaving out a lot of side stories. There are many versions of these stories, and with Atreus and Thyestes, yeah, Atreus being big-headed, he's the elder brother, so the primogeniture idea is that he's the rightful king. But they're in terms of these, they're not really kingdoms in that sense. They're more sort of little, not even city-states, I suppose, little guarded palaces, if you like. But yeah, I mean, the hubris is mighty, but they both have, I suppose, the gods are involved in this as well. But Thyestes steals his brother's, well, takes his brother's kingdom, takes his brother's wife, which is kind of Zeus-ish behavior, I suppose. Alma's saying, speaking of science fiction, have you read The Remembrance of Earth's Past, also known as the Three-Body Problem? Off topic, but I recently read it and it was really eye-opening. Alma, no, I haven't read it, but I've got the first book on the bookshelf downstairs. I wonder, did I bring it up, actually? Yeah, it's definitely on my radar, and I'm looking forward to reading it. I've got so much reading to do at the minute, but arguably I'd say it's the one piece of modern science fiction that I'm looking forward to reading the most. So and I've heard a lot of good things about it. So yeah, let me know a little bit, Alma, about what you thought was good about it. I'm actually quite, without spoiling it for me, I'm often want to know if is it well written, and has it got some good ideas, I suppose, is what I'm after in a good science fiction book. But by all things, it's an award-winning book, and I'm looking forward to reading it. And funnily enough, I've only got a few modern science fiction writers on my shelves, I suppose. And I'm kind of, when it comes to reading writers, modern writers, is it, I'm not sure, what do you call the writer of the Three-Body Problem? Is it Cixin Liu, something like that, I think? Apologies if I've got his name wrong. Chinese writer, I believe. Looking forward to checking it out, actually. But one of the more interesting things about ancient history, especially in Hebrew myth, is the second or third son taking the inheritance of the first son. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I think we pointed out, actually, and I must have a look at it because I don't sort of nosy around the Bible too much. But there's a relationship between one of the stories here to do with Atreus and Thyestes, and a similar story in the Old Testament. And it's interesting, I suppose, when we were talking about kings and kingdoms, part of the story about Atreus, I suppose, is about a king demonstrating astronomical knowledge. Graves has some interesting ideas about that story of the sun setting in the east. And Graves is a sort of funny person in terms of the classical world. I suppose the classicists tend to like his the Greek myths, but not to be too fond on his works like the White Goddess, which I suppose are a bit more poetic. But yeah, his book on the Greek myths is excellent. So I take it, is that a tie-in to the three body problem, or is that just something to do with the Atreus and Thyestes, Alma? So I was just wondering with myth, etc. Hmm. But yeah, no, Alma, all things science fiction here, by the way. If you've got any questions about or any comments, fire. This doesn't have to be particularly on topic. We did do a wee episode tonight, and I suppose it does seem weird. Why are we doing that? I mean, if you took this episode out of context, it just looks like we're doing stuff on Greek mythology, doesn't it? So we'll have one more episode to go, which will take us through the Pelopid line, and then what I had planned to do really was just kind of point use once we have those stories up, use them to kind of point out little things in June that are to do with this family, you know. But yeah, the book is good though. You would be pretty lost if you're not familiar with the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Excellent, right. But it's an interesting conspiracy thriller. Oh, very good, right. Okay. Oh no, definitely looking forward to it. As I said, it's on the shelf. No, Greek myth has nothing to do with the three body problem. No worries, that's just me running the stream and getting things, 1 and 1 equals 3. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I'm trying to find new writers that stand out from the crowd, I suppose. And there's not too. I don't know. Maybe it's the way science fiction is marketed these days, or maybe it's the fact that there's so much of it. It seems hard to pick something good out when you take a walk into the bookshop, or just go, this looks interesting. So I tend to read individual books of new authors and then go on to another new author. But for example, I tend not to get a sense of that author by doing that. So I'm just kind of dabbling at the minute. But there's so much science fiction. There's quite a lot of old science fiction out there that I haven't gone there, and a lot of it's global, if you know what I mean. I keep pointing out that Northern Ireland as a society doesn't produce science fiction, so I kind of have to look to elsewhere in the world for my sci-fi content. There are indeed very dark topics in dealing with this. I suppose this family and these stories. I had trying to put images up and try to keeping it sanitized was quite tricky, I have to say. What it's like to be in the void and knowing you have to kill people and eat them and cannibalize them in the dark forests, which is part of the problem series, right? Interesting. A lot of the stories that we're looking at within Greek mythology, these ones in particular, if you do think about what the line that we've seen so far, and the various sort of practices of ritual murder or competitions or sacrifice, and we've had consuming your children cannibalism, and family on family murder and betrayal, and also at a divine level, if you see what I mean, blasphemy and stuff like this. There are a few other stories within Greek mythology that again we can tie in to the Atreides as well, that are very, very similar. And so they are recurring motifs within mythology, and there are several stories of, I suppose, the children of Lycaon trying to feed their brother Nyctimus to Zeus is almost identical to the story of Tantalus trying to feed Zeus Pelops. And from the 50 Sons of Lycaon, I think, is where you get the word lycanthrope from, because I think Zeus turns them all into wolves. So yeah, it's a lot of this stuff is to do with kind of ritual practice, old religions, and I kind of, as much as there's a historical backdrop of what's really going on in, I suppose, the Mycenaean age, Bronze Age Greece and so on. There's also transitions, and there's something metaphorical within the stories, and eventually we end up we move as we go through the line of the Peloponnesians. We end up heading to going away from this kind of from cannibalism, ritual brutality, murder upon murder in the family, and it eventually sort of all concludes with a kind of resolve to not live our lives this way, this kind of thing, to sort things out, do it democratic, use courts, justice, this kind of thing, you know. So there is a kind of civilizing point to the stories that follow through the Peloponnesian line, if you like. There's a lot of text flying up here, so I'll just catch up a wee bit, folks. Excuse me. Peter Zydek says, I've been devouring your June material. Thank you. Oh, thanks very much, Peter. I hope you're enjoying it. We've done it a couple of times now, but we've just added subtitles to all the what we call the deep dives, which is all the episodes put together into their actual chapters of what the Ph.D. would have been. So we've done that, and yeah, for those who want to kind of read it, listen through to each chapter in its kind of threads, if you like. But I'm glad you're enjoying them, Peter. Alma says, ritual murder is a Roman thing, especially since the formation of the Republic, killing your own son to preserve democracy, like Brutus. Yeah, it's in the Roman times. We've got a couple of the artifacts that we've actually shown are Roman. Interestingly enough, I suppose, Alma, that the Romans come up with all sorts of ways to deal with that. But it's a thing you'll find in almost all cultures, all ancient cultures. There's and I'll give you. I mean, if you think about when we're dating these people too. So if you want to date the sort of Bronze Age collapse to the 12th century BC or BCE, you know, by the time we get through the Dark Ages, I suppose people are not practicing human sacrifice really anymore as we move into that. The Romans at a certain point, Alma, have a real problem with human sacrifice, and as you move down through history, you'll find that that's why they deal with the Druids in Britain, and particularly in the way that they do. So yeah, they gets to a point where there's all sorts of wee stories and different myths. One of the interesting things that recently is, and it's in one of our videos somewhere, there's been an archaeological find over in Mesoamerica, and it's a human sacrifice. It's a child's skull. But what's if you do a search for this, what's happened is that the child has been prepared with a helmet for the afterlife, made out of skulls from other children, and the other children have had to have been selected in a way that their skulls were bigger than the child. It's a very bizarre. I think they've dated it to about 1000 AD, and so depending where you're at in the world, you know, human sacrifice, ritual sacrifice, sacrifice of children, stuff like that. It's a thing, unfortunately, and as I said, if you think about the progression, we go from kind of these cults to human sacrifice down to where the people start to make animal sacrifices, you know, and then you even get things like in Greek mythology, there's a story called the trick at Mccallum. Excuse me, should take some fluids, precious fluids. This is a story to do with Prometheus, and it's kind of what you would call I suppose you'd call it a retcon thing these days, but it's a retroactive story to explain why a certain ritual exists, and it's basically why do the Greeks all sacrifice fat and bones of an animal, you know, and all the to the gods and eat the meat, and it's the story is kind of obviously humans need to eat the meat, and the gods eat ambrosia and nectar. It doesn't really make sense to give away the meat that the humans need to eat. So this story kind of, it's to do with Prometheus dressing up the mutton, or not the bones and the fat, and making it look real master chef, and then taking the actual really juicy cuts of meat and making it look hideous, and offering the gods a choice of which would they prefer to be sacrificed. You know, and of course the gods pick the fat and bones because it looks prettier. So it's an example of Prometheus, a titan, tricking the gods, but it's a kind of it's a story that kind of is designed to explain why people sacrifice bones and fat to the gods instead of, like, say, a juicy steak, which you think they might like better, you know. Dear. So yeah, it goes. It's a long. You know, you're talking a sort of a process over thousands of years as well. Um, but I think there's a quite a good story about the Athenians kind of being on a bit of a bind. And I can't remember exactly what this story is about, but they basically offered to sacrifice something like 70,000 goats to Zeus if everything works out, if they survive, you know, whatever it is that's coming their way. I can't remember the details of the story, but it's I think the point was that there wasn't enough goats in Greece at the time, and they end up kind of working out a deal where they sacrifice X amount of goats to Zeus every year to eventually pay off the debt. It's very human thinking, you know. Let me just catch up, folks. I see a Jungian analyst, and I've been thinking of studying the Dune story from a Jungian perspective, but you've really done it. Thanks for putting it out there. Oh, okay. I'm not a Jungian at all, Peter. But yeah, it's the bit I suppose that we did in the Dune series, looking at the Lord Raglan, Young, um, Joseph Campbell, etc., is to look at the mythological influences on Frank Herbert. Um, and yeah, he's very heavily influenced by Young, and I would argue that Young's influenced, you know, quite heavily by Raglan. And Herbert's very, you know, I think Brian Herbert's on record is talking about Lord Raglan's influence with Frank. You know, so it is interesting that yeah, he's very heavily into Jungian psychoanalysis, etc., etc. The whole construction of Jungian mandalas, and he uses this. We're kind of actually going to see this whenever we get through these myths about how he uses pairings and shadings and opposites within the Jungian mandalas and the idea of the archetypes of the collective unconscious. I'll tell you this, Peter, as a classicist, I believe that both the Jungian and Freudian schools are badly misinformed on Greek mythology, and I don't think they get it right. So I tend to think that their views on myth are iconotropic, if you like, that they're misunderstood. Um, and you can ask me if you want about that, but it's good fun. I wonder how a Freudian analysis of the Dune world would go. And the Romans had problems with slavery. They certainly did. But Rome wouldn't have been Rome without slaves, Alma. And but they had 3 wars against slaves. You know, you have to be careful with your slaves. The Servile Wars. Third Servile War, I think, is the Spartacan Revolt. Human sacrifice is usually an indicator of a warrior culture or deeply solar cult. In the case of the Mayans, Aztecs, as well as the Canaanites and Hellenics, as Saturn and Kronos. Yeah, it's very interesting, Alma. We're just chatting about this with my wife the other day. I don't know if any of you know Newgrange in Ireland, which is, if you look it up on Wikipedia, you'll probably find it as the Boyne Palace. And Newgrange is what we all know it by, and it's arguably older than Stonehenge and the pyramids, and it is a place of ritual sacrifice. We were chatting about, and it's like a beam of light will come in at midwinter and light up the place. And we actually took our son there a good few years ago now, and looked at. There's also burial mounds in Ireland at Nouth and Douth, basically. And we have different cultures living there over different periods of time. But one of the things that they did was they found all these white quartz stones all over the place, and they've decided to completely wrap the building with them. And I think the purpose of the white quartz stones, I think, was actually a star map. And as you're talking about solar cults, and very, very much so, I think almost all of the Abrahamic religions in some shape or form come out of the kind of religions in ancient Mesopotamia and places like that, Sumeria. they're very much, excuse me, stellar and solar cults, if you like. They're fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And you'll because of this, you'll find. I think this is to do with some of the similarities of some stories in some cultures, um, which is where you get sort of proponents of the monomyth, you know. But let's see. So fire away with your questions and comments, folks. Enjoying the crack tonight. And I hope you enjoyed the episode. For those who weren't really, who maybe checked it out without knowing what to expect, sorry if it was a bit heavy. And I hope I kind of treated it with. I hope I presented it in the right way, because it is quite nasty stuff in general, I think. I always say that the Greek stuff's nothing compared to things like the Icelandic sagas. I think they're particularly brutal. Let's see. So Peter says, I was talking with my Jungian analyst today about the age of Aquarius, and as he was talking about the age of Pisces, symbol of the fish, I visualized Paul's headboard when the hunter seeker emerged. Yeah. Well, the being the first trying on Paul's drawing into his manhood. He's got the Gom Jabbar first, hasn't he? But yeah, the room is designed to entice Paul. Peter, if I recall correctly, in the book, it's particularly set up to have motifs that would remind him of Caladan. Basically, which is pretty much a water world where they do lots of fishing and whaling and stuff. Well, if you've been watching the videos, that there's a lot of the I suppose the classical, what you call the archetypes of the collective unconscious. Paul fits into loads of them. He's a syzygy with Alia, for example, and he could be seen as a syzygy with Jessica. What we're ultimately sort of going with these videos, actually, Peter, is to show you how the myths, particularly these Greek myths, both the mortal line, if you like, and the divine interactions, how they overlay onto different members of the Atreides, and so I suppose the action in general in Dune. Yeah, so it is interesting. It's full of Jungian ideas, and even the map is a Jungian mandala, and it in particular, I have a quote in there somewhere, Peter. It's from Frank, and he talks about why he uses this stuff and what it actually brings to his writing and brings to his characterization, and how it allows him to create real depth and compare light with shadow, and etc. etc. So the whole Jungian thing is very much a part of how, not just in the story itself, but how Frank Herbert goes about actually constructing his writing, if you see what I mean. It's a part of his writing process. And it's still pretty interesting. One of the most interesting things about Ireland is how the Christians converted them under the pretense of one of the lost tribes of Israel. Okay. Well, there's I suppose, it's a long sort of thing. We get the early monastic period in Ireland, but Christianity kind of moves around, and I think it's a common kind of trait with there's an association with the classical world and the monastic order, and how that eventually ends up in Irish mythology, because it's, if you think about it, a lot of our I suppose what you would consider the books that we have our myths written down in would be kind of monastic manuscripts, which are often written by monks who are often educated a certain way or influenced by certainly the classical world. So you could take lots of identifiers from, for example, the Iliad, and apply them to something like the Toynbee Cully. And funnily enough, what we've got coming up in the next episode, Alma, is we're going to talk a bit about the casus belli of the Trojan War. Arguably about something similar with what's called the Toynbee Cully, which is a kind of a war over a couple of cows in Ireland. But the actual PhD I was going to do, and I ended up doing this Dune one, believe it or not, I was going to, the title of it was going to be an examination of the Toynbee Cully as the oldest vernacular epic in Western saga literature, and its relationship, if any, to the Homeric epics. That's what I was going to do for my PhD, and I ended up doing thought I'd have a go at Dune instead. Quite interesting. But yeah, there's a lot of this, a lot of these cultures. Have a wee look at Alma, if you're interested. Have a look at the Newgrange. If you can see any detailed stuff about it, because again, we've got different cultures that sort of move around it. And where I'm at in Ireland, just up the road, is what you would call, let me see, what would you call it? Mount Sandal. Mount Sandal Fort is arguably one of the oldest point of inhabitants by people arriving in Ireland. It's one of the oldest inhabited places in Northern Ireland. Yeah, I think there's communities dated to around possibly 10,000, 10 to 7,000 BC. But there's different periods of migration, and migration's a great carrier, I suppose, in terms of culture and stories and religions and all sorts of things. And we find lots of similarities in different cultures because they move about. Yeah, so sorry, Peter. Also, the symbol of the fish also links into Jesus as well. And Paul's based on a whole bunch of different people. Another one would be Paul of Tarsus. So yeah, there's plenty of meaning in it, and I suppose he's the fish out of water as well. But there's a few wee sort of, if you look at some of the stuff that Paul talks about, and the fact that being from a water world in this transition to a desert world, yeah, there could be a sort of zodiacal thing there. If you're looking at the old zodiacs, Peter, there's only 12 signs, but I think there's 13, and others meant to be. But it's I think if you think about it, people in ancient times didn't really have any TV or radio or anything like that. They tend to look up at the stars. I think a lot. Tell stories about the patterns there, and they pay attention. It's something that we're losing the ability to do, I think. I wonder if those monuments in Ireland were built by the hunter-gatherers of the later coming Neolithic farmer. Neolithic. Well, there's all sorts of monuments here, Peter. Sad thing, I suppose, is what Christianity does is like a lot of later religions come along, is that a lot of churches in Ireland, particularly the older ones, are built on top of earlier pagan sites. So it's a commonly done thing. It's I suppose it's kind of the Romans would call it the Roman interpretation, the Greeks would call it the Greek interpretation, the British call it the English interpretation, but it's kind of about religious assimilation. Park your church on the old church's building, but the Ireland's covered in all sorts of things. And yeah, I think it's one of those ones where, I suppose, these are mounds. A lot of these burial mounds here, as you call Kurgani, which is an interesting thing. But yeah, definitely different periods, and I'm not too sure about Newgrange, what period it would have been built. Let me have a wee quick nosy. Neolithic, yes, indeed. There you go. So yeah, you see, that's better. Passage to rather than, I don't like I think they have an official, officially they call it the Boyne Palace. And that's meant to be in a bit the way that we might call, like the Palace of Atreus or something like that. Those kind of things that you might find out in the Greek world. But it is very much, it's not a place to live in or have your buddies around for a drink or anything. It is a place of sacrifice. But yeah, it's very interesting. Check it out, guys. But yeah, and it's one of those things that, I suppose it's a wee bit controversial with putting the white stones around. But if you're ever in Ireland, excuse me, if you're ever in Ireland, it's absolutely worth a trip to. It's pretty impressive. It's as good as going to Stonehenge. Yeah, it's definitely worth a check out. There's so many. Let's have a wee look. Tennessee myth from a hermetic and alchemical sense, which ties some. Oh, hang on, somewhat to the Jungian and more Gnostic perspectives. I approach myth as what's called a euhemerist, Alma. Not fond of such terms, but there's different schools of thought, and simply put, that means that, as you've probably seen in some of my work, that, for example, I would approach myth from a archaeological, and then once I've gone past that, cultural and historical perspective. But I would evidence-based in terms of artifacts and then documents, and then a euhemerist basically would suggest that there's a fundamental truth, if you like, behind all myths, and very much the modern use of the word myth is that it's something that's not true, and I would highly disagree with that. In fact, there's aspects to these myths that we're looking at, that regardless of the overlay of the stories, we're pretty sure these people are real. Some of them, anyway. And you'll get, for example, Agamemnon killing a Tantalus, who's the son of Proteus, who's actually the son of the original Tantalus. So we get some repetitive names, and there's a wee bit of confusion in some of these things, but that's how I go at it anyway. And again, there's all sorts of different approaches to myth. So many parallels with the Vedas and early Greek myth, and I think might be related to the Indo-Europeans and their obsession with honor and upholding the familial respect. Yeah, I'd argue there's a lot of the details are to do with religious practices, and some of them are, solar, as you say, seasonal. But absolutely, there are lots of parallels between. I would argue that, for example, Indian culture and ancient Indian culture and ancient Irish culture have an awful lot in common, and in fact, I'd argue that India and Ireland, they're, I suppose, culturally, but historically, have many parallels right up until modern days, particularly with their relationships, but more in the modern day, how they've dealt with Britain and Empire. But yeah, absolutely. Somebody recommended me, and I was checking it out, and it was the Mahabharata, if I've said it correctly, and it was the old TV series that was on, and I think it's on YouTube somewhere. But yeah, I would basically grab. It's a question of getting time, but excuse me, guys. I would read any myth at all. I love myths and legends, and you can give me, if you've got a text of a myth from anywhere in the world, I'd happily read it and want to find out more immediately about the culture and the stories. Is he Paul of Tarsus when he comes back as the preacher? Well, it could be, I suppose. It's just that there, I suppose, in terms of Christianity, who Herbert pointed out, of the different people that Paul Atreides is based on, that Paul of Tarsus is his thinking in terms of the name, and that character picked it. Paul always comes off as a more self. I was about to get that more self-conscious Muhammad. The one character he's not is Jesus, I suppose. Peter, if that makes sense. And there's a trend in mythography, and you'll find it in Lord Raglan, and you'll find it in oh goodness, what do you call him? Is it Fitzgerald? You'll find it in quite a few of these guys in the 19th century and the early 20th century. They will not write about Jesus, and this is quite interesting. They will write about Muhammad, and it's a funny way. It's kind of almost an opposite of what you get today. For example, people being worried about discussing Muhammad, etc., etc. I suppose mainly these are Christian writers, white Christian writers writing within British Empire, and they're trying to look. Some of them are doing pretty good work, but they won't go near Jesus. Absolutely not. But they're happy to write about Muhammad, and I'd say absolutely. There's a lot more of Muhammad, I'd say, in Paul. I'm trying to think of the other. I suppose there's historical characters in Paul, and there's a little bit of Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence or T.E. Shaw. But then we've also got several divine, and you could argue that Orestes and Agamemnon are probably historical. There's a lot of Orestes in Paul Atreides. There's a lot of Agamemnon in Paul Atreides. There's a lot of the god Apollo as well. And particular to do with his prescience, that's the Apollo's the overlay there. And Artemis is and again the divine brother and sister is the overlay for Alia. So when he comes back as the preacher, that's there's a good I'd argue that's heavily Oedipus, and that's where we slip away. We take the little sideline from the Peloped line. In terms of let me just see, Peter, that makes sense if one considered Paul a failed Pharisee who uses knowledge to establish himself as the Zion prophet. You guys probably know a wee bit more about Paul of Tarsus than I do. Thanks, Babs. A little over my head. I'll have to read up on those, but I'm very interested. Excellent. Aye, Babs, here's one for you then, Peter. So, Blind Paul is very much a lot like Oedipus. And the connection to this myth, if you want to know who do I think is the overlay of the Baron from Greek mythology, then it's Laius, who we mentioned last week. And Laius is the father of Oedipus, and we got to see a little bit of him last week, as he's the kidnapper of Chrysippus. And it's a motif of Laius's, I suppose. Yeah, it's actually to do with a kind of he's described, I think, in Apollodorus as being the first catamite. Possible, if I'm remembering correctly. And of course, he is the father of Oedipus, who Oedipus will ultimately kill. And I think there's some aspects of his character in the Baron. Interestingly enough. Oh. Excuse me. But sorry, the point I was making was, I suppose that the person that kind of broke that trend that I won't write about Jesus, I suppose the point I'm trying to make is a lot of these mythographers, when they want to imprint this kind of the idea of Jesus as a character onto a literary creation or something, they won't, or even to analyze Jesus as a myth, for example, they're scared to go near it because of a fear of a backlash. So they tend to honestly, have I got these books here? Here we go. So just to give you an example, they're happy to look at Muhammad. And I suppose this is maybe a question of the times they were written in. Bear with me 1 wee second. Let's see. Hero continued. This is Raglan's set of heroes. And he talks about Troy. He's got Cuchulainn. Let's see, Hengist and Horsa, King Arthur, the North sagas, Robin Hood. Tradition. Let me see. Sorry, it's not got a great. King of traditions of other lands. 114. Let me just see. Been a wee while since I flicked through this. But this is Raglan, who has his ritualistic steps for the hero. There's which is based on the Oedipus myth, and Oedipus is the one that scores highly. Here's the other book I was thinking on, is Thomas Carlyle, for example, and this is a really good book on. And the title is On Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History by Thomas Carlyle, published in New York. Let me see if I can get a date for it. It's a great book, by the way. It's an old one now. I can't see a date on it, but he's happy to go with his heroes. Hero as divinity is Odin. Hero as prophet, Muhammad. And then hero as poet, he goes Dante, Shakespeare. As priest, Luther. The hero is man of letters, Johnson, Rousseau, Burns, etc. Hero is king, but won't go near Jesus. And it's is it Fraser's The Golden Bough that starts having a look at that? And so I don't know. I think it's the one character that Paul's not based on is Jesus, and I think it's a very deliberate kind of left out. It's part of, I suppose, a kind of trend in Western writers. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, you know. Excuse me. Spice cigarettes would be nice to help me digest the Quran. I genuinely think you're brave, and I tried listening to the audiobook of Quran, couldn't get past the fast. I'll tell you something, guys. It's a thing that people have a bit of a bother with books from the ancient world, I suppose. But reading a Bible is or the Quran to me is not any different than, say, reading Apollodorus or Plutarch's Lives or any of these things. I suppose you just kind of have to approach them a certain way, and they have a certain style. I'd argue that the New Testament's a really badly written book, just in terms of style compared to everything else around it in the ancient world, you know. But sometimes these books I suppose the Bible, if you think about it, is a library, So it's a collection of books. It's best to maybe digest them one at a time. But the one thing that is interesting, I suppose, is if you do have a knowledge of cultures that are around the world at those times that aren't the ones that you're looking at, if you see what I mean. Um, you can look at, I suppose, the Old Testament and apply knowledge of the Greek world and the Egyptian world to it, etc., etc. And the New Testament's the same, all the whole Mediterranean and all the cultures around it in Europe and everything. So it's funny sometimes we think about these books in isolation. Hmm. Colleges and cannibals. I'm looking for the science fiction stream. You're there, colleges and cannibals. We're a wee bit off topic, I suppose, but we're covering some stuff to do with mythology that is to do with Dune. But if you've got any science fiction questions at all or comments, fire away. It's an open thing, pretty much. I apologize to everybody for everything being backwards tonight. I don't know what I've done, and I don't want to try and fix it in case I mess it up. So we'll try and get it flipped around for next time. I don't know, quite looking at my time machine picture floating backwards there. So apologies if it didn't seem we were chatting too much about sci-fi, but we're kind of, it is our thing here, I suppose. When I was a kid, Peter says I'd mix up Dune with Clash of the Titans. The Ray Harryhausen, the old Clash of the Titans is really good. I went to see that in the cinema. I think it's excellent. The story of Perseus. Yeah, and I suppose that those stories would fit in chronologically before the Pelopid line. Jesus is an interesting topic, but I always preferred Muhammad as a topic of myth due to his warlike nature as well as deep esotericism. I can't find that hard to say. Let me have another go at that. Esotericism. Christ can be if you approach it from the Nag Hammadi Gospels. Excuse me. The witches are the Gorgons. Paul is Perseus. An interesting fact for you, if you like, Peter, is this is my bass guitar here, and its name is Stetheno, and this is Uriel, by the way. So these, if you know the names of the Sisters of Medusa, and the instruments are called that because of their character. So Stetheno is my bass, forceful, and Uriel or Uriale is far-ranging in Greek. And the names suit the instruments, if you like. And my ever faithful this is my ever faithful. This is Antigone. This is my concert guitar. Well battered over the years, But I tend to name my guitars after Greek monsters or or Greek women, I suppose. Apollinaris Christ seems more or less akin to Addis and Dionysus without Paul. I suppose, simply put, we have no written words, no words of Jesus at all, and nothing written down by him. Everything's secondhand. And in terms of source material, I suppose the argument for whether he's a historical being or not sort of gets going, and there's different ways of looking at it, I suppose. But I suppose if you understand Dune, if you think what Herbert's trying to point out is that here's a universal super being. Here's Paul Atreides, and the danger really, as we start to explore the hero, if we get into Dune Messiah, we realize it's the things like the Quizerati, these things these structures of power that form around the hero, and start to shape how that hero is perceived and seen. And it is very interesting. There's all sorts of things within both the Old Testament and the New Testament you'll find elsewhere, and they're very much and again the Quran is these stories are older, and that's one of the things that for myself in terms of studying the ancient world. I suppose growing up in Northern Ireland, whether you like it or not, they tend to force the Bible down your throat, regardless of what school you go to. And I just started identifying things that were in the Bible that I found elsewhere and older. And the full-on denial of what would you call it? Cognitive. I don't know, what is the term? Cognitive disassociation or something. But it got to the point where I kind of got curious about where you take your flood Genesis narrative, start there and away you go, and you'll suddenly find yourself in older cultures and traveling further back. And the Greeks have a flood narrative, the Babylonians have a flood narrative, the Sumerian, etc., etc. Excuse me. But so no, I mean, when I say Paul's based on quite a lot of people, and there's even several. I'd argue that he has, if you think about it, as being a hero of heroes, and a particularly constructed hero. I mean, he really is meant to be the all-time hero, if you like. I suppose in that sense, that if you think everybody around him is really good. Duncan's the best, meant to be the best swordsman. Thufir's meant to be the best mentat. I would argue probably Yuri's probably meant to be the best doctor. But everyone who works for House Atreides is either are the best at what they do, but also are filled with the desire for revenge and violence. Mix up Dune with Clash of the Titans. That's quite a good mix up, Peter. I have to say, the witches, the Gorgons. I'd argue that I kind of was starting to write a play once upon a time, and I might consider finishing it. But I was going to write a play about Medusa, because I think the subject of Medusa in Greek mythology is very interesting, and she's arguably one of the most immoral, really hard done by women. Just the whole thing, it is interesting. But the story of what happens to Medusa is appalling on every level, and has no no good side to it at all, I suppose, which is why she ends up being a representation of what all is. I suppose that all that is fearful about women to men, and then becomes what you call, I suppose, apopotraic symbols, these Gorgon ions and stuff. So I'm fascinated by the Gorgons and Medusa in particular. And I tend to think of about a few monsters within Greek mythology that you tend to think about are a bit hard done by. I tend to think a wee bit about Asterion the same way. Asterion is the name of the Minotaur, by the way. So you tend to have a wee bit of sympathy for the thing, if you see what I mean. Grimdark Elven Warmaster. Hi, Grimdark. Emperor Shaddam had genuine fears of the Atreides soldiers being elites, as evidenced by Duncan and Gurney. Yes, indeed. He trained them. It's the fear of the Emperor, isn't it? It's I kind of going to sort of consider the Emperor a bit like Zeus in this matter, and decides to put his warring children to war. I suppose children that he doesn't trust. I think one of the things I always pointed out is that everything in Dune could be avoided. Simply, all of it could be avoided, and actually possibly even give Leto sort of almost what he wants. It's by having a wedding. If Leto marries one of Shaddam's daughters, or has Paul marry them, even I hope the whole thing quite doesn't make sense. Then the whole thing kind of falls apart. But it's about everybody making a grab for the throne, I think. Peter Zedek says, great talk, sir. My student has arrived, so I must begin teaching. I'll subscribe and look for your streams. Thank you very much, Peter. Thanks for joining us. Take it easy and say hi to your student. Have a good one. But yeah, so there we go, folks. And as I said, it's there are quite a number of motifs within the Dune. I'd say for most of the stuff to do with the Pelopons is in the first Dune novel, but we pick it up. There's little bits and pieces that we're reminded of, and throughout the books, Herbert does remind us that we're connected to this is the Atreides. They're connected to the House of Atreus, and what a bunch of lovely people they are. So I mean, Atreus himself is a fascinating character, and I think I put a wee note in. There's a possible link to, I believe, is it the Dial of Ahias in the Bible. Which is pretty much identical in terms of detail story here. Yeah, and as I said, we have so many little offshoots of this story that we're about to run into the Trojan War and etc., and all of these different things coming in, and the the real sort of it's a great bunch of stories. If we went into it in any detail, we'd been there for years. So we really have taken the thread just with the family line down on through, But you'll get this kind of. I was thinking about what sort of things do you find Greek mythology? What sort of science fiction do you find Greek mythology? And it's all over the place. And I just thought, what's the first thing that popped into my mind? And I was thinking, Tantalus, what pick a science fiction book with Greek mythology. And the first thing I went to was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And I was thinking about the religion, and it's Mercerism. It's not right, Mercerism. Mercerism, I think it's called. Yeah. And the whole idea in that is empathy to do with the environmental damage that's been done to the earth. That people go into these booths and they plug in. It's basically they're reliving the punishment of Sisyphus from in Greek mythology, and these boulders come rolling down, and I suppose it's like a virtual booth, and these boulders come down and hit the person in the virtual booth, and they fall down and come out of the virtual reality thing. But whenever they've left, they've actually got a physical wound. And I was just thinking the Mercerism is quite a big part of that book, and it is basically a kind of virtual reality version of Sisyphus in Tartarus, which is pretty interesting. Hello, what was that for me? Thank you very much. Precious fluids, folks. Excellent, some fresh juice. Grimdark says, I'll say Hector and Priam were fairly noble, unlike most of the Achaean League. Oh yeah, Hector, tamer of horses. Hector and Priam. Hector's I suppose the Achaeans have got their chaps. They're good guys and bad guys on both sides, I suppose. And I think that's something I always find quite interesting about the Iliad, is it's a war, but everybody's kind of equally presented in a way. The Greeks have the Achaeans have their heroes, Trojans have theirs, Excuse me. And there's a lot of, I suppose, within you get a lot of Aristeiots, here's our best archer against their best archer, one-on-one combat, the testing of excellence. But yeah, I would agree. Priam's a great tragic figure, and so is Hector, to be honest. But Hector, I think, is very noble. Probably one of the most noble characters in the Iliad and the Odyssey. But yeah, I always think Achilles is always described like a dog in the Iliad. So I always thought it was a bit harsh on dogs, but maybe the dog of war and stuff like this. Brad Rose says, this is all way out of my knowledge, but this and the last discussion have been thoroughly enjoyable by learning about connections I was ignorant of, such as Shakespeare lifting Greek mythology. Oh, and hi everyone. Hello, Brad. Well, Brad, hi. This is the broadcast after. Have you seen the film, Brad? As the big question we're all dying to know. This was we would hopefully be online for you having seen it. It came out yesterday in Australia. You're possibly on to the 4th. It's still the 3rd of December here. So let us know, Brad, if you saw it and what you thought about it. Grimdark says, Aeneas is a bit of a douche, though, and for obvious reasons as an ass. Yeah, I mean, well, even the most noble of them, I think, Grimdark, they all have their moments. I'd argue if who's the most admirable out of all of them, and then you'd probably have to, if you've got your classical chops on, you'd probably have to go with Odysseus. But Odysseus is still, he's not faithful to his wife on his journey home. The whole back to my Penelope, but he's he likes to wander a bit, and but he's an interesting character. One of the, interestingly enough, folks, whenever in the video tonight, we're trying to show the rather unpleasant topic of the rape of Pelopeia by Thyestes, and it's to do with her hiding how she identifies. As you'll see later, by the way, that's to be. Did we get to that bit? Hang on. Oh, wow, I think we did. She hides the sword under the statue of Athena in the temple. And the piece of art that we actually used from that was actually Ajax kidnapping Cassandra in the temple, and which is a very interesting little story. And we kind of have the end tail of that with the next video, but it was one of those myths to do with the palladium that we didn't really want to. We would get lost in, if you know what I mean. Brad says, no, you're booked to see tomorrow evening. Got a lot on my plate right now, preparing for my return to work next week. Excellent, Brad. I hope you're not too swamped with all of that. And booked to see it tomorrow evening, so I hope you have a good evening. And are you going to see it in IMAX, Brad? I would hope so. But I hope you have a good experience, mate, as you've waited long enough for. Got along. Let's see, Greek mythology and sci-fi. You mentioned Ulysses 31 some time ago. Yeah, yes, indeed. I love Ulysses 31. That's one of those. Is it a kind of European Japanese crossover kind of animations from? I recall it from the 80s anyway, and it's very very good. Yes, indeed. And I used to play the theme music. I learned how to play the theme. It's not particularly difficult, but I quite enjoy playing the. It's got a good theme tune, good intro. It's a great introduction, sort of, to the classics, and a bit of the Odyssey, a fair bit of it in that. Yeah. Ulysses. Yeah, it's very good. If anybody hasn't seen it, it's a good one. I don't know how many episodes, but yeah, it's going back a wee bit, back to the 80s, I think. But if you ever, I don't know, would it be the same sort of animation, that same sort of look that you get in those Daft Punk videos? Those Daft Punk science fiction pop videos. No IMAX in Sydney. It's being upgraded. At least you've got one, Brad. Well, listen, I hope you have a good experience with the film. Not too sure what you're going to think of it, Brad, at this point, but I do. It's on YouTube. What, the film? Is it really? Or do you mean the IMAX? Oh, Ulysses 31's on YouTube. So we're getting better at this, aren't we? Well, there you go, folks. If anybody's got any questions about tonight's video or science fiction or any wee comments or anything, we've been talking about a few bits and pieces there today at night. I think about the three-bodied problem is having a wee chat. I was trying to think of some other writers that I haven't gotten. Tell you what, actually, hold on one second. And oh. Just in terms of, sorry about that, folks, just to run away quickly. I just thought I did have a couple of these out on I keep a sort of bookshelf outside the bedroom door where I kind of keep books I haven't read yet or ones that I'm working at. So, I mean, I'm not too sure how modern this is, but this is a book that I really enjoyed, and it's been made into a TV series. I wonder when it came out. 2009. China Miéville. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. China Miéville's The City in the City. I suppose there's different places in the world where people might see this book in a certain way, but coming from Northern Ireland, I'd argue there's a lot of Belfast in that book, and maybe Berlin. It's a really good science fiction book, like a kind of murder mystery sort of thing. And I also read this one, which is really good, by the way. Dark Eden by Chris Beckett, and winner of the Arthur C. Clarke Award for 2013. And I think there's two more, and I've picked up the second one, but haven't got around to reading it. So that, apart from maybe Alistair Reynolds and Anne Leckie, I would say that's kind of the modern science fiction writers that I read at the minute. But just to show you, by the way, I keep telling you about this really violent set of ice. That's the Icelandic sagas. And that's there we go. And a beautiful book, actually, but it's not as big as I thought. It's one of these, it's about 800 pages, very heavy stuff. But yeah, Chris Beckett's, is it Dark Eden is the first one? Yeah, Dark Eden is a very good book, and it's kind of like a social science fiction, almost what you would call a shaggy God story in a sort of way, or an Adam and Eve type story. If there's one thing we don't hear about often in science fiction streams, it's catamites. Ah, well, no, it's interesting. I don't know what you think, folks. I was having a chat earlier with Dr. Cara Kennedy about what we thought of the film and the characters in the Denis Villeneuve's Dune, but we were talking about the Baron, and the Baron would be this catamite, if you like, in relation to what we were talking about, colleges and cannibals. It's the character that we were talking about is Laius from Greek mythology, and it was in is the father of Oedipus, who is the kidnapper of a boy called Chrysippus, and it's actually the murder of Chrysippus that's kind of gets some of this the action, I suppose, going in some of these stories. But yeah, you'll find all sorts of things in science fiction. It's an odd term, I suppose, but in actual fact, the fact that Laius there's a mention that I think that Laius there went on to be Laius would be the king of Thebes, so there went on to be a soldier cult there that basically were catamites, if you like, that they kept uh, children as sexual companions, and that went on for. I think that's a historical thing that there's evidence of that cult surviving there, and there's as much as we're presenting a very running through these kind of stories with the Pelopid line, there's stuff to do with Laius that it's because Pelops forgives him for that thing that the gods aren't actually altogether happy about it. But the gods get up to a fair amount of that kind of stuff as well in the Greek myths, unfortunately, with Pelops himself, actually, as much as I'll put it this way, the reason why I use that word is because that's the word that Apollodorus uses. But the way we put it is put it in the last episode that Pelops is carried away to Olympus by Neptune to be a boon companion, and arguably Tantalus is a boon companion of Zeus. I suppose possibly in the same way that Ganymede might be, you know. So yeah, it's all of this stuff. I suppose we're talking about um, the Pelopids, the Pelopidi, if you like, this family that are really what the Atreides, the Atreidi would be a part of. And in terms of Dune, the curse of the House of Atreus, etc. That's who these guys are, and they're really just a full-on bunch. And yeah, I mean, if you actually think about the horror of what Atreus does to Thyestes, and the devil's in the detail in these stories, that he waits for his brother to consume his three children, and then waits for him to mighty fine meal, and then he sits and can you imagine? Is it the Charlie Chaplin thing with the wee imagine doing that with your children, his hands and feet, and look, I've got the heads of your children, and it's incredibly psychotic and cruel and bonkers, to be honest with you. And as I said, these stories within this family line tend to happen again and again. But yeah, but you'll get the use of mythology, like particularly this family, all and the I suppose the stories associated with them all over the place in science fiction, for example. Um, a lot of the ships in Babylon 5 have particular names. For example, the Earth ships have got a lot of they're either Earth generals or Greek generals, or sort of carry. Was it your man's ship is the Agamemnon, isn't it? Sorry, I used a very Northern Irish phrase there. Your man. What is it you call him? Bruce Boxleitner. In the Babylon 5 series, his ship's the Agamemnon, for example. The great war leader that comes to save the day. Kind of whenever he was in that, when I was watching those, I kind of half expected him to get murdered at the end of the show. But there you go. But yeah, it's science fiction. I don't know. It's I don't know if you've been in here before. Not colleges and cannibals, but that's an appropriately phrased name there. That's an appropriate name for our stream. But yeah, we sort of chat about just started doing this with the science fiction station, and we talk about happy to chat about all things sci-fi. And I'll tell you what, folks. By the way, I'd love a little bit of feedback from you. I've been asked about maybe starting a bit of a Dune book club, possibly doing something like that. I don't know if any of you would be interested in it. I'm trying to sort of gauge if if anybody would be interested in it. But I'm thinking about setting up a couple of broadcasts a week, and we're going to try and get, once we've got these videos done, we're going to try and settle into producing a video a week, and then also an audiobook a week, and then I'm trying to do a couple of live streams to sort of go with that. I'm thinking about possibly making them one of them a book club, though I've been asked to do it on June, and I keep, why not have a Discord server as well for the book club? I'm working on it, Grimdark. I've had a look at it. I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm trying to figure out that many different things at the minute. I've got a Zoom room, and I've tried setting one up, and I've actually bookmarked it, I think, but I'm not too sure what to. Maybe I've gone away from it. I'm going. This is the weekend, by the way, Grimdark, for me to have a look at all of this stuff, because I think Dr. Cara Kennedy has got a book on June coming out in a couple of weeks, and she'd like me to do a kind of we'll try and do a launch for the book, and I'm going to sort of host it and moderate it. Sorry. So for me, I've got to kind of get a bit more au fait with this tech, things like OBS Studio and stuff. But I'm definitely going to have a Discord server as well for the book club. So is that like a, as far as I can tell, just as like a old fashioned post group, I suppose, is what I'm thinking. But yeah, and I've also got a domain name, so I've been meaning to pick up, get it hosted and get some website up. So hopefully some of this stuff will be up over maybe by Christmas. The reason for that, actually, we've talked about some documents and ebooks and stuff that I have that I think some of you would be quite interested in, things like the June Encyclopedia and so on, which are quite chunky. But I wouldn't mind having a place to put all of these kind of documents and bits and pieces that I have. I've an awful lot of related material to science fiction and to June in general. I've got folders full of the stuff over here, and some of it I think would be of interest to you, and I'm not even sure some of it exists in certain forms anymore. But so I will I've been asked before about this, Grimdark, and I'm trying to Discord, the Zoom thing, and getting the OBS studio working up, and even possibly being able to bring somebody else in and have a chat with, more than one person. Because I'm sure yous are scunnered listening to me natter on all the time. And it would be nice to hear another opinion, I suppose, as much as we get your opinions, and I'm always happy to read them. I don't know, but the banter goes okay sometimes. And sometimes I wish there was somebody else here to just say something. Discord servers are easy to create. I'm very au fait with technology, Grimdark. I'll be honest with you. It's the bottom line is that generally I've got a few seconds to look at something, and if I can't pick it up, I'll move on to the next thing. So it's I haven't had time, to be honest with you, in a long time. So we have a wee bit coming up this weekend, and see if I can get a bit of learning done. And yeah, but I'll be honest with you, I've actually got some stuff we're thinking about doing on Ian Banks, and I've been wanting to get tearing into Ian Banks for a while. And I'm reading two books at the minute. I'm reading Consider Phlebas again, and I'm reading The Star's My Destination again, and I'd like to do a video on both of those, and particularly for Alfred Bester and also The Demolished Man. So I'd kind of look. That's where I'm kind of looking to go. But I'd like to tear into the culture, and I think the culture are fantastic. And if any of you haven't read any of the culture books, I mean, get there fast, because they are, I think, the finest thing that exists in science fiction at the minute, on all sorts of levels. And they're really good. So I've actually got stuff like the Banksonian, which is like a fanzine dedicated to Ian M. Banks' science fiction. I've got about 19 issues of it. So little things like that. Whenever we get around to doing the culture books, I'd really love to be able to go, if you want this stuff, there it is, go have a look, and download it if you like. And it's the one problem with YouTube is it doesn't really facilitate us throwing up documents to go with the stuff. I'm reading Heinlein's Space Cadet currently. Excellent. I love that. A lot of that Heinlein, I suppose they call it juvenile fiction. I don't really think of it that way. I found a whole bunch of Heinlein down the stairs, Grimdark, by the way, that I haven't read. Just sort of random selection of paperbacks. Which I do like my Heinlein, I have to say. My favorite one of those grimdark is Have Spacesuit Will Travel. Um, I think that's a great book. And especially it's a great book if you've got a kid who goes, I want this all the time. Hand them that book, go read it. It's just it's a good book about just sort of putting your mind to work and going sorting stuff out for yourself. But I really enjoyed it as an adult. I haven't read any of Heinlein's juvenile fiction as a child. I've read them all as an adult, but I think that's a great one if you haven't read it. And is it the mother thing in it and stuff? If I can remember correctly, but it's just about this kid wanting a spacesuit and how he goes about getting it. I think, and it's a wonderful story. Genuinely, there's something quite nice about it. I think that's you don't get in a lot of science fiction these days. Heinlein's free love theme in his later works were quite insane. I quite enjoyed that too. um, would have been reading Strange in a Strange Land, I suppose, in the early 90s, maybe late 80s, but no, early 90s. And I really enjoyed it. I suppose it is looking back at the whole counterculture, the 60s, the free love and all of that stuff, There's David Segovia saying, hello, I think I'm late. You're grand, David. Hello, welcome to the room. Welcome to the chat. Thanks for joining us. No, we're just nattering away. We've had our video, just to recap, David, we've had our wee video part 2 on the Pelopons and June, though I suppose we're just going through the Pelopid line to get to the end of that. We'll have another video to follow that next week, and then after that, then we'll be doing another wee video to kind of finish it off, to sort of point out how Herbert uses some of the motifs, etc., if you like, of the Atreidae in June. And so we've been having a wee chat about that, the Greek myths there today, and we're all over the place as usual, David. So if you've got any questions or comments, or I'm always curious to find out about other people's interests in science fiction, what you like, and so on, and I'm happy to take any wee suggestions. By the way, if anybody's got ideas for stuff, fire them away. We have an email there, sciencefictionstation@gmail.com. But yeah, I think I was having a wee chat about a couple of new science fiction writers. That is the one thing I find it really hard to find, I think, and it's not because of. I suppose I would use maybe sites like IO9 and stuff like that to have a nosy at what's coming up, but there's often so much that you go, wow, that here's all the new sci-fi books for August, and it's just a big, massive list. And I often find I'm really bad at choosing things out of I'm the sort of person who goes into a restaurant. If there's 2 things in the menu, it's one thing too many. I'll have one thing, I'm very bad at choosing, I suppose. But I don't know what it is, and I find it hard to see what is it about one book on a bookshelf that will separate it from the others, that will make you go. For example, this. All right, maybe it had the Dark Eden book by Chris Beckett. And I read this a few years ago, and I just haven't got around to reading the sequel. I don't know. It's not particularly outstanding, the cover or anything. And it's really not kind of. I don't know what made me grab it, but I did read it, and I thought it was very well written. But I don't know, things just I've been aware of. I suppose I've been aware of talking about China Miéville's The City in the City, which is an extremely good book. And I haven't read anything else by him, but again, this is a question of me going, right, there's a writer on the shelf, I'll grab one of his and have a go. I would certainly. I picked that book because I think it was one of the shortest of his, and I think a lot of China Miéville's books are quite chunky. I don't know if has anybody read any of his, if what they think of him. But I think that, as I said, the BBC have done a wee mini series of The City in the City, and it wasn't bad, but it was a very good book. So we're just shooting the breeze as usual, David, and we were just before you arrived there, we were just having a wee quick chat, and Grimdark was saying he's on Heinlein Space Cadet, and we were just having a wee chat about Heinlein going all free love, I suppose. Yeah, and I don't know. Let me see. The other book that's like that, I suppose, is Time Enough for Love. I don't know if you've read that, Grimdark, but it's a really good. I'd say that's my two favourites. Arguably, apart from I'm quite fond of Have Space It Will Travel. Yeah. But and yeah, Starship Troopers is a great read. I think it's interesting. I don't know what you guys think, but a lot of the science fiction that's been coming to the screen from the last, it's what we're seeing hitting the screens, the movie screens, the TV screens. It's 50s and 60s science fiction. Almost an awful lot of it. Well, I suppose late golden age and heading up towards that. I suppose where we get to the new wave, and we've had a wee bit of the new wave, and now we're heading towards authors, I think, that are coming out of the 80s. China's Kraken is an excellent run. Thank you. Yeah, recommend it then, Colleges and Cannibals. Expanse for more hard sci-fi recently. Yeah, I don't think I would end up going near them, Grimdark. The sad thing is because I've been watching the TV show, which is kind of a pity. But yeah, I don't know if it's that's kind of my kind of sci-fi. I don't know. David says, I'm going to check your Pelopids videos. Sometimes I think that Herbert gathered an enormous amount of knowledge and data. Amazing. Well, he did. That's the thing. We were having a chat tonight about. I was having a chat tonight with Dr. Cara Kennedy, as I was saying to you folks, and we were talking about what's lifted out of the film and all the various influences, different aspects of all sorts of things from the movie. But really just thinking about what Herbert wanted, Excuse me. Let me bring this forward a wee bit. I seem to be awfully far away. There we go. I think that's a bit better. There we are. Yeah, there's so much, and as I said, the big thing for me, David, was finding out whenever I was doing my research, and I was kind of praised for it at the time, particularly by my external. It was Andy Sawyer. Was the whole Samuel Butler Erewhon influence on Dune, and how much of Erewhon is in Dune itself, actual real solid ideas that you can't go, I see where that came from. And somebody was asking me earlier there, I think we were having a wee chat way back about, I think was it Peter maybe, about Carl Jung, and Jung's ideas of the collective unconscious. If you're kind of familiar when these different things are written and so on, you've got those ideas right there in Butler's Erewhon in 1872. And I've caught Herbert doing it, by the way. So I've caught Herbert trying to plagiarize, not plagiarize. How to put it this way: pretending he doesn't know where he got an idea from, and having referenced that idea elsewhere, so that at a previous point where he absolutely knows where he got that idea from. So that one of the really interesting things that and I'll tell you where I actually found it, David, is it's where he pretends that he doesn't really know about where the quotation on what ecology is. He pretends he doesn't know where he got that from. That he says ecology is it the study of consequences or something like that, and he's actually lifted that quote from Paul Bigelow Sears, and the quote isn't about ecology; it's about science. And if you follow that trail, you'll actually find Samuel Butler referenced on the same page by Paul Bigelow Sears talking about what if Erewhon came true, and very much that he's looking at this guy for learning about deserts, and he gets Samuel Butler, artificial intelligence, Butler and Jihad, 20,000 year projection, all of it, the collective unconscious, the preborn, unborn, it's all there, and as I said, there's so much he's lifted from so many different cultures, so many different myths and stories, and uses them in a subtle way. And I think we were talking about the use of Jung. You're going, how does he get away with this? And I think I've pointed out it's something that's done by an awful lot of science fiction writers and an awful lot of fantasy writers. We can change a few things, make it look slightly different. And I'll give you an example, by the way, guys, because I know I did a couple of videos a while back on a certain date, and I posted my videos. Um, my videos are what you would call, I put them up as Creative Commons. I want the whole idea is this is meant to be a bit educational, but a bit fun, hopefully. But the idea is that you can take any of this work and use it in your own. That's the whole point. If you're a Dune fan, you want to make Dune videos. I hope people do. Then if I've done something in these videos that you think is useful, then go for it. So it's all Creative Commons. But I've seen a couple of videos that basically took my work, rewrote it in a wee way, if you like, put it in a slightly different spin, and then presented it as something fresh. And then, but there are a couple of horrific mistakes in it that clearly identify it as being ripped from my work. It's a funny thing. But Herbert does the same thing. I've been an examiner for a long time. It's something that I know to look for. If kind of almost trained to look for it. And Herbert does it an awful lot. But it's the Jungian, as I said, the use of the Jungian mandalas that we talked about earlier, where he uses them to create juxtapositions, and he talks about shadings of tone, light, and etc. How Herbert uses them to actually A, build his characters, and B, structure the action, make opposites, syzygies, etc. And it's a fundamental of how he actually writes his stories and how he creates his characters. You'll see that, for example, that's why it's not that obvious, but I think the best one is Leto II, the baby. You're going to see this next week as the sacrifice at Aulis. And it's an exact almost inversion of instead of a female child, it's a male child. Instead of the war machine being becalmed, it's actually hyper, very stormy, and it's the individual that's becalmed. And it's still a moment of sacrifice before that the war can truly begin and it come to an end, if you like. And it's an absolute analog between Agamemnon's sacrifice of his own daughter, Iphigenia. Paul, with his presence, allows the sacrifice of Leto II, the baby Leto II. But there's all sorts of stuff there, and so it's none of it's too obvious, but there's enough of it. Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a, let's see. But yeah, and so that this is just the Greek myths, and it's one family, David. And as I said, we can run with at a certain point. This is to do with the Jungian stuff, really. We run with the idea of Paul as Oedipus from a certain point where he's lost his eyesight. And if you go to the Heroes episode, it's the one on Lord Raglan. I think what we do is we look at the 22 steps of Lord Raglan and what he calls those ritualistic patterns. And the only person that fits all 22 of those is Oedipus. But Paul scores very high on that score. And at a certain point, because Paul's following that scale, which you could argue is very similar to the cyclical nature of the monomyth, there's a lot of similarities between him and Oedipus. And Oedipus, of course, is blind. And I actually thought the end of the third Matrix film was the whole blind Neo and Trinity, and very much a bit of a Dune ripoff as well. So, oh yeah, it says, David, there's a lot of young ideas in Dune. For instance, the genetic memory and collective unconscious. Yeah, that's my point, David. They're not Jung's ideas, are they? They're Butler's. And you can date them to 1872 with the publication of Erewhon. That's what I think is fascinating. And that Dune has a big connection to another book in the science fiction history, and an important one, because Erewhon's arguably the first book that really discusses artificial intelligence, machine singularity, actually. So yeah, it's but yeah, where does Jung get his ideas is the interesting thing. And I suppose the other book that's connected fundamentally to Erewhon is Vril, or The Coming Race, by Edward Bulwer-Lytton. And that's the drug Vril, the substance Vril in there is in particular interest, Melange has very few analogues in literature as a particular type of drug that does so many things. And I'd say there's Fluid Karma and Southland Tales, but couple of Philip K. Dick's drugs probably, but the main drug that I'd say Melange has an analog to is Vril. and the connection again there. It's interesting. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen Father Ted, um, the Irish comedy about the priests, but the kind of thing I'm talking about is, I suppose, there's an episode where they enter the Eurovision Song Contest. I don't know if you've seen it, but I think it is that they've kind of written their song for the Eurovision Song Contest, and they realise that they've ripped it off someone else. As it ends up becoming "My Lovely Horse." If you've not seen it, have a look at the Divine Comedy performing "My Lovely Horse." It's a great song. If any of you have no idea what I'm talking about, you probably think I've gone a bit mad. But Father Ted's an Irish sitcom. It's probably one of the greatest sitcoms ever written. But the Eurovision Song Contest episode's just ingenious. Alex Comfort's Tetrarch. Yes, that Alex Comfort is... I don't know who Alex Comfort is. Steeped in young. More mandalas than you can shake a shitty stick at. Let me have a look. I've not heard of... Colleges and Cannibals. You'd be surprised at how wonderfully out of touch I am with just generally life, the universe, and everything. I'm a bit of a misanthrope, unfortunately. So let me see. Oh, he's a scientist, right? Okay. Oh, right, that Alex Comfort, right? Okay, the Joyce. Oh, he's passed away. Bibliography. Oh, scientist writing sci-fi. Wondering, is it sexy sci-fi? Colleges and Cannibals. Is it particularly hairy people having sex in space? Steeped in young, more mandalas than you can shake a stick at. So, all sorts of people write science fiction. You know, I think Young probably got a fair bit. Pathan Campbell's. Hi, Pathan. I think Young probably got a fair bit of ideas from Freud. Then they had their famous split. Young seems to have picked up the rest from his psychology practice. I'll give you my 10 cents worth, as they say in the States, Pathan. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is that both schools of psychological and psychoanalytical thought, if you want, do not say misanthrope, say specialist. There's an attempt by the police want to make the word misogynist, or they want to make misogyny a crime in this country. It's blasphemy is a crime in this country, by the way. But my wife's a bit of a misogynist, and I'm a misanthrope. But I think it's quite funny. It hasn't occurred to the police that women can be misogynists as well. I think misanthropy just covers the whole human race, doesn't it? Yeah, Pathan, the idea, I suppose, from my point of view, it's what I would call iconotropy, is that I think both Freud got the Oedipus myth badly wrong, and as for Jung, his ideas on the collective archetypes, or his ideas on the archetypes of the collective unconscious, based upon the monsters and I suppose nightmares from the classical world, is a very Western orientated point of view. And again, I think both men have a misunderstanding of myth. But there you go. But but particularly, I suppose, the Jungian school, with the whole Oedipus thing, that completely got the Oedipus myth wrong entirely. And so if that's the basis of a lot of that, then it's what we call iconotropy. It's the deliberate or accidental misinterpretation of myth, but it's also really the failure to look into the subject properly. As for sorry, that's Freud. Hang on, let me get this right. Freud and Oedipus. Sorry. And as for Jung, the idea with the collective archetypes, with the archetypes of the collective unconscious. Sorry, trying to get this right in my head. What would be the fundamental flaw in that is, fundamentally that the equation, I think, I would say this works for both schools of thought, is that myths equals dreams. And they're not. Myths are not dreams, and they're not. They're not similar. Well, I mean, they may be similar in terms of possibly an art, but the myths have a thing, if you like. And as I said, when we approach myth, I think archaeologically first, and then culturally, historically, that's the approach to take. So no, I think often there's ideas. Yeah, maybe the ideas of these things inspired them, but to build their approach to it, I think it's a very West. It's a bit like Campbell's monomyth. It's a very particular way of looking at it. It's a Western way of looking at it, and yeah, it's not particularly universal. I think. Do not say mythotrope says colleges and canals say specialist. And blasphemy because an all-powerful deity can't stand up for itself. Yeah, blasphemer. Well, I don't think the blasphemy in this case in Northern Ireland. I don't have to particularly pick an omnipotent deity. Um, Brad, I think I can pick any deity and describe it, in a blasphemous way. And part of me would actually like to have a go. I blaspheme all the time, but I can be quite polite. But profanity, blasphemy, and obscenity, isn't it? It's often, if somebody's bothered by one, I tend to switch to one of the other two. Yeah, it is absurd that in the 21st century, yeah, it's Northern Ireland. Yeah, all powerful. I don't know if read your Bible. He doesn't come across that way to me. All of the things that I suppose God is in the Bible, he's not. So he's not omniscient. He's not omnipresent, and he's not omnipotent. I don't think, but he's certainly not omniscient, and he's not particularly moral. Hi, Keith. Keith Kolb saying hello, everyone. How you doing, Keith? Thanks for joining us. We're nattering away. I suppose, goodness, we went all into Jung and Freud there. On the pulpit, but yeah, I mean, I think that both their schools of thought are heavily influenced by Greek mythology. But yeah, there are some weird and wonderful stories in the world of myth. I think there are rather idiosyncratic. They don't have analogues elsewhere in the world, So just to catch up, Keith, we're just chatting a bit about our video that we did today was on the second part of the Pelopids, and this really particularly violent and outrageous family from Greek mythology that are connected fundamentally to Paul Atreides and all the action in Dune. And I think we're at that kind of science fiction stage of the night where we're wandering all over the place. And I suppose the point is mythology, and particularly these myths from, the Trojan War and so on, they're used in a lot of sci-fi. And yeah, some people do it better than others. I was trying to think of other ones as well, but yeah, let's have a wee look. Speaking of Freud and architecture, takes us back to the Matrix. I suppose it does. Yeah, I'm curious about the new Matrix, guys. I watched the trailer. It's the first trailer I think I've seen, and it was kind of really just them, doing that kind of wipe across where you get to see how is the Matrix. It's kind of like a revisions or something, isn't it? What is it called? Resurrections. I spent, but I'll be curious to see it. Actually, I did enjoy the Matrix trilogy, but I thought it lost the plot a wee bit. And I've always thought it was heavily based on Dune and To Your Scattered Bodies Go, and I enjoy both those books actually. So yeah. Keith says I spent the last 6 hours wrestling with a software version controlled database, but other than that, that sounds fun. Everyone's saying hello. So there you go. So if you've got any questions or comments, Keith, for the night, or anybody else, don't know if Babs is still listening. Babs has got company tonight, but it's all fun and games. And as I said, the science fiction that I'm reading at the minute, trying to get through, consider Flaybas for the culture, and yes, so we can start doing some videos on the culture. And Mr. Ian M. Banks, and we're Mr. Ian Banks, who I've met a couple of times. Never managed to get a signed book, sadly. And I'm also, looking to, but I'm reading Alfred Bester's Tiger, and I'm all over the place with short stories. So I'm also hoping to bring you what have we got next in terms of audiobooks? We're going to be doing a Micro Mega by Voltaire, and then we're doing The Sword of the Phoenix. We're going to do a bit of Robert E. Howard. Thinking of doing one Conan, one Lovecraft, and possibly something by Burroughs. maybe even something Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers. I don't know. But there we go. But yeah, so we've been pretty busy. I've had quite a lot of stuff on the board to try and get done for the station, and slowly but surely we're wiping things out. And once we finish the Palapids in June, I'm hoping to have a wee look at Buckaroo Banzai and an old British TV show called Sapphire and Steel, which I'm not too sure is particularly well known out in the world. And I kind of like my obscure, or really good, but obscure science fiction, you know. I'm about to come over all Epicurean with all this talk of omnipotence. Oh, I love Epicurus. I'm pretty much a person who's consistently tried all the schools of Greek thought at some point. So I've been an Epicurean and a hedonist and been a Stoic on occasion. I argue I'm a cynic, if you want, or a kynic. Uh, in case we call this is meant to be a space station, but we call it the Dog House, based on the Strontium Dog space station, if you know what I mean. But if you know our friend Diogenes, all cynics are dog-like, which is a good way to be, I think. Pathan comes says, "Have you read Mircea Eliade?" I have not. He had great points on how rituals allow us to transcend material, time, and space. Walter F. Otto and Dionysus thought myth was a way to reconnect with mythical heroes. Yeah, I think I've heard of Otto's work. And Dionysus thought myth was a way to reconnect with mythical heroes. It's an interesting thing. Myth, well, depending on how you look at it's tricky. Dionysus is a good example. I don't know if Mr. Otto's book on Dionysus is to do with that particular myth and how it moves about. But there's if you arguably the story of Dionysus is the story of how viniculture moves around the ancient world, and how that knowledge and that technology moves around with it. But a lot of the stories to do with Dionysus are kind of him turning up and, hey, let's have a party, if you like, and it's generally either people being accepting of him, and kind of doing it his way and partying with Dionysus, and then off he goes. Or there's generally some kind of doesn't go quite right, and it usually ends up in madness or death for whoever happens to be involved. And a lot of it's to do with actually how to make wine. In the ancient world, wine can be lethal. I don't know if you guys know what potshine is in Ireland. I suppose in America maybe have moonshine, and there's all sorts of versions of this around it. Potshine is, goodness, 190 proof alcohol, isn't it? In Northern Ireland, it can blind you. It's farmers make it and stuff, and you set fire to it, it'll burn for quite some time. I've lost my train of thought completely. I don't know why I was talking about potshine. But tell me you have not read Matter before Flaybath. Oh, well, no, I've read them all. Colleges and Cannibals. So I've been reading. Goodness, I think I read my first Ian Banks book. Probably, I don't know, early 90s, maybe late 80s. But I was reading them in university in the 90s. So, but no, I started with Consider Flaybath, and then I went straight to Use of Weapons, I think. And but no, I've read them all. And the last ones I was pretty much, if Ian M. Banks wrote a book, I'd be straight at the shop to buy it. So I read the last three in a row. But yeah, I've pretty much probably read mostly in order. I think I didn't get the Player of Games in the right order, but yeah, no, what I thought I would do is read through them myself in the order of publication. I actually think if you're going to jump into the culture, I think I would argue that State of the Art, the short stories, plus I think I'd argue Use of Weapons is a much more fun book, if you know what I mean. But saying that, reading through Consider Flaybass again, I am enjoying it. Just up to the Game of Damage at the minute. And I've just been thinking about how to present the culture books, but often, I suppose the way the culture is presented in the stories is often we get to look at the culture through an outsider's viewpoint. So it's Horza the Changer and Consider Flaybass, if you like, and what's his name in Use of Weapons is Zacalway. Is a great character. Sometimes it's the other civilizations. I loved Matter, by the way. I've got it on audiobook. Probably can't see it. Everything's backwards, isn't it? Today? But I hardly ever buy audiobooks. But I don't know if that's backwards as well, isn't it? But let me see. Army Ian Banks books about. I think he's a fair bit about the house. They're quite large books, a lot of them. But no, I have to. I have to say I love them. I've read them all at least twice. No, all twice. I'd say I've read uh, Use of Weapons probably about 4 times, and I've read Accession about 4 times because I love Accession. No, tell a lie. I haven't read them all twice. I haven't read Inversions twice. Um, I think it's one of the sort of more slow culture books, but I think it's got one of the best endings. So yeah, but yeah, I think certainly as you get into them, then it's better to sort of stick to the order that they're published. But I don't know if you've read them all or not. I don't know what was the last one. Is it? I think so. I think they're not here. I think they're downstairs. But well, I just picked up a new copy of Flaybus. It's the only one that I didn't have. So there's my really old Use of Weapons there. Absolutely battered. That's all written all over. So I've obviously made notes on it at some point. As you can see, it's been scribbled on. But I'm very much looking forward to that. And it's really sad we're not going to get any more culture books at all. Colleges and Cannibals, Sapphire and Steel have been assigned. Absolutely. Somebody's heard of them anyway. David Mccallum and Joanna Lumley, and I was able to pick them up on DVD about a year ago, and they were a show that I suppose if Doctor Who had you hiding behind the couch, Sapphire and Steel have you diving out the window. Still struggling through hydrogen a few years now. Yeah, who's the other one? There's one other that turns up on it. The introduction to it is really good. Is it, transuranic elements may not be used where life exists. The set Sapphire and Steel. Facta non verba says, "Howdy all, greetings from Florida, USA Empire." Howdy, Facta. Facta non verba. How you doing, sir? Or madam? Or mademoiselle, pardon me. How's it going? Hope you're keeping well. Thanks for joining us. Because it's a great BBC production of state of the art available on this platform. I've got audio versions of all of them on Walkman at the minute, but I haven't listened to them. I just sort of downloaded them. Though I have got Accession, I think, that I found. Hang on a wee second. Maybe Accession. No, really weird one. No, I'll tell you what. Sorry, I'll not stand there and waste your time, folks. I have it on audiobook somewhere. But I definitely I'd be very interested to see that. I think, but the state of the art, I think, is a great set of stories, and I particularly enjoyed. I was living in London for the first time when I read them. I'm pretty sure, and being a bit of a fish out of water, etc. It was a very interesting time for me. All of the culture books are great, but just as a series and a body of ideas and as something fun, and they are fun, but they're adult and they're, I'd say, just really fun, really well written, very intelligent science fiction, and arguably the panacea for all of this dark and gloomy science fiction is the culture. It's an attempt to present a science fiction future that's possible. They're meant to be the best possible outcome for mankind, and warts and all. I don't know what you guys think, if any culture fans out there, but really sad that Ian Banks passed away when he did, and we've got the 10 books, and we'll not get any more, sadly. And they jump all over the place. I think there's slightly different styles, but Accession's the one with the ships. And the idea is that the Accession, that it's like something 1,000 times beyond the culture, and it really just plays wonderfully with scale, and the scale of the culture is awesome, and the violence is incredible. It's just, I don't think, it's just so unbelievably over the top and beyond anything that anybody else has been doing. I mean, it makes just, I don't know, it makes any kind of battle if you read the culture, the battles of it are not that they're particularly heavy, but they would put anything you've seen on screen to shame. It'd be very difficult to film the culture, I think. But yeah, and the death toll is quite excessive as well. But they're a very fun bunch of very fun society. They're meant to be, I suppose, a socio-anarchic kind of state, I suppose. So I meant Banks's Hydrogen Sonata. Oh, Matter before the Hydrogen Sonata. And is it the last? Well, is that the last one? Isn't it? And Surface Detail. I think that's a really interesting book. All the virtual hells and stuff, and the fact that the culture can extend into sort of virtual heavens and hells. They're brilliant ideas. Of course, the Consider Flaybass is a. Does anybody know who Flaybass is or Fleabass? There's an analogy there, I think, isn't it? It's supposed to be, as far as I've tried to investigate this, but it's a reference to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. But my understanding is that Fleabass is meant to be a helmsman of Odysseus, but I can't find any reference to it. I've tried to put on my classical head and try to find that, though I know he loses a number of helmsmen, I suppose. But if anybody hasn't read them, the last three culture books by Ian Banks, as I said, he passed away not long after the last one, and there's a rather good documentary where he's being interviewed on the BBC, I think by, is it Kirsty Work on, I think you'll probably find it on YouTube. It's very insightful. The last three books by Ian Banks are absolute powerhouses. And yeah, they're just, the ideas are incredible. They're really fun. They're mind-blowing stuff. And I think I've done a wee sort of mention about him in the A to Z, but I think he writes science fiction. The pacing of his books, the acceleration, the action, it's incredible. And I haven't really come across another author who's that has had that kind of level of their command of their powers, if you like. And I think he's helped a lot. He was helped a lot by being a normal fiction writer too, But the last three culture books, Hydrogen Sonata, Matter, and Surface Detail, they're just brilliant. But they're all good. Absolutely. If you haven't checked them out, folks, do give them a chance. I think we were meant to be seeing one of the culture films coming soon, but I think it's fallen through. Excuse me. Pathan Campbell says, watched a lot of your videos, helped me gain a deeper understanding of Dune and led me to give Messiah a second chance. Turned out to like it a lot more when I could see the depth. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Excellent. Thank you very much, Pathan. That's kind of job done from my point of view. If it leads you to a book or helps you take a bit more of an appreciation of it, especially if you didn't make through the last time. Giving Dune Messiah a second chance. Yeah, it totally changes everything, doesn't it? And oh wow. And I don't know if you can keep on with them, but I actually think they all the books pay off. Children of Dune takes a bit more of an adventure story turn again, I think, but I think Dune Messiah is the political intrigue and also the reveal of how dangerous Paul Atreides really is. And the full, as I said, the full reveal. I think there's little things in Dune that we're told that demonstrate that Paul's not the hero we think. He is a hero, but he's not going to be one that can be controlled, I think, and he is quite dangerous. I suppose it depends on how you look at morality. I've often discussed this, Faith. I don't know what you think, but I quite like poking at Dune fans and just to remind them that you shouldn't. That Paul Atreides and particularly Leader of the Second, that you're not supposed to like these guys, and you have to question, why do you admire them so much? It's the thing that I enjoy, I suppose, in terms of pointing out what Frank was trying to do with these characters, was to show you how dangerous a hero of a particular ability with his own particular vision, how dangerous that hero can be with that vision. And the interesting bit, I love poking at people who love Dune, really, to say that it's the visions part of it as well, you see. But the golden path is almost always our justification for liking Paul and Leto. And no matter what we do, really, as literary characters, I still like them, but I don't think they're good people. That's interesting. But if you get Pathan, if you do get to the God Emperor of Dune, as I sometimes would say, I think that's the point where Herbert kind of goes right. He originally planned Dune as a trilogy, and I think God Emperor, as much as I'm going to do it to you again. You haven't learned your lesson, but the God Emperor is kind of almost pointing it all out to you. That it kind of points out, well, why did you there's something greatly educating about him, and he is this ultimate predator. I warned you once. Look at me. As I said, I'm warning you. I'm the ultimate predator. And whenever we look at it in terms of the little people that we never see, they're both completely genocidal, and their death tolls are in the billions. And probably by the time we don't really get a death toll, I think, for Leto II, but arguably it's in the trillions at that point, I think. So yeah, I'm glad it's that's great. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the books. And I think the first three books work together quite well, but they also work in pairs, Pathan. I think Dune and Dune Messiah work together, and then Children of Dune and God Emperor work together quite well, and then the last two. So as much as there's kind of their trilogies, they're actually set up in pairs as well. But stick to them. Take your time. They're worth it, and I think as things are revealed, I think that's it. There's so much to see to it, but it is kind of almost Dune is just really the first major act, I think, and he's a very deceptive writer. The space battles in Babylon 5 are very reminiscent of Banks. You see, again, in my mind, everything that ever fought in Babylon 5 would get twatted by one culture vehicle. And that's the scale of it. I did like the space battles, I have to say, in Babylon 5 Colleges and Cannibals. I really enjoyed it. I particularly liked the Earth ships and the nature of them. I thought they were well designed. There's really, I suppose, is it the very middle episode? Is it? I'm not sure what you call it. Is it turning point or breaking point or something like that, where it all kicks off? There's some of the battles in Babylon 5 are brilliant, actually. But I just think of everything in no, it's again, even a Death Star would be. I'll tell you what, Colleges and Cannibal. Have you read? If you've read the State of the Art, the culture are all having a Star Trek and Star Wars party on board the ship above Earth. I think, isn't it? They're all in the State of the Art story. I'm pretty sure that's the story. They're all just having a bit of a piss take. I think they all find it quite interesting. But the scale and the speed of and the aggression of some of the culture ships later on, but particularly in Accession, I think it really just I get what you're saying. There's the big epic space battle, but it's so, I think, in terms of the scale of the culture, very small. Leto II sure wanted humanity to not rely on charismatic leaders for his endgame. And with the interesting thing I said with the goal, each time Paul goes, Leto II goes, the golden path goes with him. And I suppose we're coming down to that fundamental question, guys. What would have Frank done with the last book? To me, I suppose that's partly why we're doing this Greek mythology thing. If there's a suggestion within Frank's notes that are left, the 30 pages of notes, that he was heading a certain way with the story, and excuse me, sorry, I got a very tickly nose, and if that's the case, it does seem to follow in a similar mode to the story of the Pelopids. Excuse me again, sorry. Oh, I'll sneeze. Sorry, very tickly nose. Apologize. So that's kind of tied into why we're doing these videos, and as I said, the name Atreides is always should be loaded, and the scattering more for survival for humanity. Again, tying that into the different characters within the Pelopid line scattering, people going away before they come back to extract their revenge, this kind of thing. And interestingly enough, Grimdark, as my knowledge in the classics is really old. I haven't been near this stuff. Well, I read it as a hobby now, but professionally haven't been near it. Well, I occasionally teach some of the drama stuff, but professionally haven't been near it since late 90s. And great fun to read it all again. But I'm thinking there's actually probably quite a lot more to this stuff that's than I can recall. It's overlaid in June, you know. But yeah, absolutely. The leader of the second sure wanted humanity to not rely on charismatic leaders for his end game. It's the interesting how that kind of sense of the divided God. He'll not be around for the end game, but every worm will have a pearl of his awareness, if you see what I mean. The scattering, more survival for humanity. Yeah, a diaspora, if you like. Great events that happen in human history. And yeah, I think that's sort of evident in human history, that we're always moving along and migrating. And I suppose, to me, the history of the earth, history of mankind, is the history of migration because of changing environment, you know. And we still need to migrate in some ways like that, but the modern idea of nations stops people following the natural rhythms of migration, I think, in the world. Red lines on maps and stuff like that. It is interesting, but where he would have went with it, who knows. And that's what I said. We have a few wee analogues with the story of the Pelopids right at the end, with the suggestion of where Frank was going. And the only thing really for me is, would he have wrapped it up with the logical conclusion, maybe, of this overlay of this family's myths? Or, and as I've often said this to you guys before, would he do it to us one more time? Would the Duncan Idaho Kwisatz Haderach, would he be the would it be even worse again, or would it be I suppose, or actually considered mankind losing Kralazek actually as well? But that was just my, playing little sort of mental exercises with it, you know. Nathan Campbell, did you find anything about Herbert's religious beliefs during your research? Yeah, there's a fair bit. Nathan, Herbert's family are, I suppose, on one side, he's got these Irish maternal Catholic, and so Irish Catholic, and on the other side we have a kind of Germanic Protestant stroke agnostic. So that's the background to his family. And Brian Herbert's got some stuff about him, but I think it's sort of a combination of mainly Catholic raising, I suppose. The Bene Gesserit are based on his maternal aunts, Jesuit, etc. So again, another one of those gender inversions that he does quite a lot of. But basically, I think there is a wee quote in there somewhere in one of my videos about what Brian says. He basically considered himself eclectic, and that his own personal philosophy was, he borrowed from, I think he took what he wanted to from whatever belief system he ideas, and built up his own belief system, I think. But I think that's more of a kind of spiritual thing. I don't think, and you probably get this from reading his work, that he's not into sort of organized religion. I'd argue that June is a heavily a warning against religion as well. That religion is a in particular how it relates to Paul and mythology as well. But pardon me, religion is a tool of statecraft, as is mythology. So it's we do chat a wee bit. He's kind of more interested. There's a lot of stuff, esoteric stuff, sort of turning up at the time, and he's kind of looking at all sorts. And it's the 60s and the 50s and the 70s and so on. Excuse me. And I think he's a bit of a dabbler, I suppose. But that's the gist of it. I got. I think he was probably anti-religious, but spiritual, if you want to take it that. And I think he put, because he's looking at enough different cultures and so on, that I think he adapts various things into his own lifestyle. I think he's very sort of environmentally minded. and he also has, I suppose he's looking into, there's always the people come up with this, kind of systems like general semantics and Dianetics and all of these kind of things that turn up. There's always somebody with a brilliant idea system for life. So he's just pretty eclectic. I think he's got journalistic chops and always described himself as a yellow journalist. So I wouldn't say particularly, those are the influences in his early life anyway. And I think we can certainly see them. And I said that I think it's well talked about. Brian Herbert's book, Dreamer of June, is a good biography of his father. But there you go. So yeah, a fair bit, I suppose. But I think sometimes he's quite a hard person to get a finger on, Frank Herbert. He's a wee bit mysterious in some ways, and I don't think he's altogether honest. I find him a very deceptive writer, and I find him a very deceptive individual in general. I don't know if that. I don't mean he's a run-around he's a mythomaniac or anything, but I find he's a writer who's trying to sell his work, push certain ideas, and really promote himself in a certain way. Well, I'll tell you what, folks, I'll just run through the last few comments here, but I will wrap it up shortly in a few minutes because my throat's a wee bit sore, but my son does have to get up for work as well, and because my hearing isn't brilliant, I tend to be a wee bit loud. So I'll just run through a few more wee comments, folks, and then we'll say goodnight, if that's okay. Let's just have a Grimdark saying, relationship between religious institutions and government is an important theme of June. It is indeed. Red lines on maps, let us not confuse nations with states. Well, what's the difference? And then what's a nation state? A nation's a place where you're born, from the word natal, isn't it? National, nativity, all of those words come from to be born. I suppose nations and states, yeah. City-states. One of the jokes we used to say, how many countries that were involved with the first Olympics, and the answer is none. Because just city-states around at that time. Frank Herbert converted to Zen Buddhism. There we go. Grimdark's got a bit more info on it than me. And then was a lapsed Catholic. Thank you, Grimdark. It's been a long time since I looked at some of this stuff, by the way, so my memory's not always big. Ladies, behave. Sorry, my dogs are going nuts here, folks. Brad said, thank you again for your time, Doc. Have a good weekend, says Peyton. Thank you, guys. Syncretic rather than eclectic, perhaps. Well, listen, sorry about the dogs going barky, woof, woof, folks. It's been a pleasure, as always. And thank you all for joining me tonight. And lots of new people in the room. Thanks for joining us and contributing, as always. It's ladies, behave. Whew. Who's this? I'll just show you this one. Here you go, ladies. This is the one there you go. That's my big barky woof woof there. And there's a little one, but they're going bonkers. But anyway, sorry, folks. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll have another video next week, and a bit more to deal with these pelipids in June, hopefully, and we'll get to the June bit. And they're a handful. Grimdark, the pair of them. So they are, but they're good girls. That's Holly Holiday, and the other one is Evil Noodles. Yeah, isn't that right? Oh, hello. There you are. You come up. Oh, there you go. Who's that? Listen, folks. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us. Please keep yourselves safe wherever you are, and take care of yourselves. And hopefully, we'll see you next week. And in the meantime, all the very best. And good night. Bye bye. Oh, what you are, man? What?